Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's Father Joseph Alexander Suchorski here again. Today is February 13, 2016. Today, I would like to talk to you about a letter that I received in the mail from the Milwaukee Catholic Archdiocese and Archbishop Jerome Edward Listicki, who is in charge of the Milwaukee Catholic Archdiocese. Now, before we get into this, as many of you know, I was raised Catholic all my life. I made most of my sacraments Catholic. My baptism, my first communion, my confirmation. When I became an ordained priest and took my holy orders, I didn't become a Catholic priest. I went outside the Catholic Church to another church that's non-denominational. And I took my holy orders to become a non-denominational ordained priest and minister. And that is because, well, there's many reasons for that. One, I believe there's only one God anyway. It doesn't matter what your faith is. I believe that everybody just worships Him differently. Another thing too is becoming a Catholic priest. There's so many things within the Catholic Church that I do not agree with. There's some things I agree with and some things I don't agree with. And we're going to talk about that today, especially because of my background as a law enforcement professional prior to me becoming an ordained priest and minister. Now, as you know, recently in the last several years, there has been a lot of talk about the priest sex abuse cases. Okay? Now, this is a very touchy situation. Okay, especially for the Catholic Church, because really, they didn't want nobody to know about this kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, this past year, a settlement was reached with the Milwaukee Catholic Archdiocese for the sex abuse survivors, and it was on the news here in Milwaukee. Fox 6 had it, TMJ4 had it, and they did several interviews with Archbishop Jerome E. Listicki. And Archbishop Listicki wanted all 500 of the sex abuse cases dismissed. He wanted all the charges dismissed against the Catholic priests who were involved in that. Now, that's something they showed on the news. They showed the documents to that. So that's actual fact. It's not slander in any way. As a law enforcement professional and an ordained priest, I believe that Archbishop Listicki is not fit to serve in the office and be a clergyman, especially given the fact that he wanted all 500 of these cases dismissed simply so they wouldn't have to pay out money. Okay? Then he got caught in another lie because the Archdiocese claimed that they were bankrupt. Okay? They're shuffling around their money, and they had put it in the cemetery fund. Okay? Thinking that they'd get away with it. Well, that backfired on them. And I remember the news media, I believe it was Fox 6 if I recall correctly, that did an interview with him, and Archbishop Listicki, the person who was interviewing him, quoted him on something, and Archbishop Listicki was like, no, I didn't say that, this, that, and they actually pulled his statement, proving he lied and that he did say it. Okay? Now, as a law enforcement professional and a priest and a person in general, I believe that any priest who is involved in these sex abuse cases should be in prison. They should go to prison. Yes, I believe that forgiveness is something important too. That the survivor should forgive, not for the priest's sake, but for their own sake. But I believe that these priests who committed these terrible, terrible crimes should be in prison. And for Archbishop Listicki to say that he wanted all 500 cases to be dismissed, that's not a true servant of God. That's somebody who's looking out for the best interest of the Catholic Church. And as you know, there's a lot of things I don't agree with in the Catholic Church. One is their stance on the fact that if you're divorced, unless you get a church annulment, they won't let you take Holy Communion. Even if you get an annulment from a judge, they don't count that. And we actually talked about that in our first video that we posted about this. Okay? Now, as I've said then, going back to the Last Supper, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, said right out, he wanted everybody to take Holy Communion. He didn't say you could only do it if you're married and you haven't been divorced, or that you can only do it if you had an annulment from a church. Okay? I don't know what it costs for an annulment through the Catholic Church now, but back when I was a kid, some 20-some years ago, they wanted $2,000 for each annulment, okay? And that, to me, it's just a way for the church to rip off money from people. Now, also back when I was a kid, this was a time, back in the 80s, back when priests, especially here in Milwaukee, a lot of Catholic priests, if you were in an abusive marriage, 'cause I'd have friends who would talk to me who, their parents were fighting, they were abusive towards each other and stuff. And the priest back then would tell people, you don't get divorced. You stay and you live with the abusers, what they would say. Well, you know what? That's wrong. And any Catholic priest that says that should be defrocked. They should be kicked out of the priesthood. And that brings me to another thing, just before we get into this letter here from Archbishop Listicki. There was an article yesterday online, on the internet, from the Pope in the Vatican. It was from time.com, and talked about the Pope saying that bishops have no obligation to report abuse. Well, you know what? As much as I respect the Pope, my respect level just dropped for him. Because everybody has an obligation to report abuse, whether you're a priest, whether you're a police officer, whether you're social services, whether you're just a person on the streets and you're seeing somebody being abused. An example of that is, one time I was over at the Milwaukee Public Museum, and this was not long after I got ordained. And they had a school field trip in there of MPS kids. And I remember this just like it was yesterday. This was almost about a year ago now. And there was a female black teacher, African American, wearing a red MPS shirt. She had real short hair. It was shaved down. She was sitting there yelling at an African American student who was crying and crying. And then she several times physically grabbed him by the face. Like that. Hard. As soon as she saw me, because I looked at her, as soon as she saw me, she let go of him and she took off with the students. And then she's yelling at him. So what I did was, I did the right thing. I went right to the Milwaukee Public Museum Security, right in their office by the parking garage there. And one of the things that I'm kind of not happy about is the officer who was on duty, his response. He more or less had the attitude, what do you expect me to do about it? Well, they're in your facility, this MPS teacher's physically abusing a student, grabbing his face as hard as she can, yelling at him while he's crying. I'm sitting there reporting it to you, and what do you expect to do about it? Camera had shut off for a minute, so we don't know where we left off, but the point that I was getting at is you have a teacher who's physically abusing a student by grabbing their face as hard as she can, and you report it to the Milwaukee Public Museum Security, and they say, pretty much, what are we supposed to do about it? Well, here's the thing. You look at your surveillance cameras, okay? You take a description of the teacher who's doing this. And I even pointed them out to her on the camera. I said, right there, they're in the lunchroom, So finally, his end response is, okay, we'll take care of it. We'll monitor them for any further activity. Given the fact that I also worked in security prior to joining the law enforcement field, that's why people take law enforcement they take security as a joke. Because you got clowns like that who are unprofessional, who don't know what they're doing. Simple as that. That's just one example of abuse, okay? And I did the right thing. I notified the public security. And that's why, in a way, I also feel that homeschooling is one of the best options. Myself, I was homeschooled for a lot of years, growing up. I went to public school, I went to Catholic school, I was homeschooled. You know, I did all different options, okay? And when I graduated high school, I graduated with a 3.5 GPA. I went to college for law enforcement, security, private investigation, and I graduated with a 4.0 GPA, high honors, and in the top 6% of my class. So anybody that tells you that homeschool kids are not smart, I'm the exception to that rule. And today, I'm an ordained priest. Anyway, getting back to this, we'd like to discuss this letter, and getting back to the article about the Pope, about the Pope saying that bishops don't have an obligation to report abuse. I beg to disagree. Yes, they do. And I think the Pope is wrong for that, and I think that the Pope should be defrocked for that. This is the same kind of stuff that when Pope Benedict XVI was in office, this is part of the reason why he resigned, okay? Because you remember, he resigned not long after his butler leaked all those papers on the sex abuse case. And then they had that article about, oh, the Pope Benedict forgives his butler for doing that. His butler did the right thing and had every obligation to report what was going on. Simple as that. So basically, what Pope Benedict XVI did, also known as Joseph Ratzinger, which is his birth name, he resigned, okay? He pulled a Hillary Clinton is what he did. He resigned saying, you know, he was sick and this and that, and that's the same thing Hillary Clinton did when she was Secretary of State and the Benghazi incident happened, and 4 American soldiers were killed and 1 U.S. ambassador on her watch. And instead of taking responsibility for it, she resigned saying she was sick and she couldn't finish out her term, and then all of a sudden now she's running for president. You know, it must be a miracle. Miraculously she's recovered. The point of the fact is there's so much corruption and abuse within these systems, within the government, within religion, within law enforcement. And these people who commit this corruption are not fit to serve their seats. And if this is Pope Francis's response on abuse, that bishops and clergy are not responsible and they are not obligated to report this, this guy's not fit to be the Pope then, because that's not a true servant of God. So we're going to get to this letter here because there's some things that I feel that the public should know about this. Right here. This came in the mail from the Catholic Stewardship from Archbishop Jerome Edward Lesticky's office. And it says, Archdiocese of Milwaukee, Jubilee Year of Mercy, Chapter 11 Bankruptcy Proceeding Update, February 2016. And it reads, after nearly 5 years, the Archdiocese of Milwaukee's Chapter 11 proceeding has come to a close, with a settlement reached with abuse survivors who had filed claims of sexual abuse of a minor. The settlement was reached through mediation, and it will pay abuse survivors approximately $21 million. This is a large amount of money, but no amount of money could ever restore what was taken from these individuals. The money will be shared by the abuse survivors of the diocesan priests, but some payments will also be made to those who made claims against religious order men and women and lay people who were employed by the archdiocesan parishes or schools. The settlement was approved by the bankruptcy court on November 9, 2015, and no appeals were filed, which means the bankruptcy is over and the archdiocese can devote its full attention to the resources to its ministries in southeastern Wisconsin, with the rendition of the spiritual, charitable, and educational mission of the Church. The following information is provided to assist your understanding of what has happened and what it means for parishioners, parishes, and schools in southeastern Wisconsin. Here's where we go now. Chapter 11 Settlement Q&A. Will abuse survivors receive money? The answer: through mediation, it was agreed that approximately 450 individuals will share in $21 million provided by the Archdiocese to settle claims of clergy sex abuse of a minor. So the church is basically getting off because they're settling out of court for this. The priests who did this should be in jail. That should have been something that was listed on here. What happens to those priests? Question 2. What else will survivors receive from the Archdiocese? Abuse survivors will continue to receive the pastoral care and concern the church has tried to provide for decades. I find that as a crack because the Catholic Church tried to cover this up for decades. It continues to say this outreach will continue, and in addition, the Archdiocese has established a lifetime therapy fund of $500,000, which is $500,000, funded by the contributions from the parishes to ensure abuse survivors receiving counseling and therapy assistance for as long as they need. Next question, important one. Where will the settlement money come from? The settlement money will come from various sources, including insurance settlements of approximately $11 million. The Cemetery Perpetual Care Trust will lend the Archdiocese $3 million. Now remember, that's where the Milwaukee Catholic Archdiocese shuffled their money when they claimed their bankruptcy and they claimed that they were broke. They tried to hide their money in the cemetery fund. But people caught on to that. It goes on to say, reimburse the Archdiocese $5 million for past unreimbursed cemetery care expenses and contribute an additional $8 million to settle the lawsuit against the cemetery trust. Let's continue to the next page. Will Archdiocesan services or staffing be cut? Through the ongoing generosity of donors to the Catholic Stewardship Appeal and the ministry services provided by the Archdiocese to parishes, schools, and individuals have been maintained during the bankruptcy. Now what that means is, it says right there, through the generous donors of the Catholic Stewardship. This came from the Catholic Stewardship wanting money. So basically what it is the Catholic Church is billing you, ladies and gentlemen, they're billing you, the parishioners, for their priest's sex abuse scandal. All that money you donate in the collection basket at a Catholic church, some of that money, probably if not a lot of it, goes to the sex abuse scandal. You're paying for the priest's mistakes and for the crimes that they committed. Now, do you feel that's right? Because I certainly don't. I feel the Catholic Church and the Archdiocese and the Vatican should be 100% responsible for this. And they claim that, they filed bankruptcy, they didn't have the money, okay? They shifted the money around to the cemetery fund, trying to hide it so people couldn't find it. They lied to the law, saying they were broke. Now, the Vatican, where the Pope is the head Catholic church in the world for Catholic order. It has been rumored that the floors of the Catholic Church are made of gold. They got so many valuable paintings that are priceless there. Okay? So many artifacts are priceless that they could sell to raise money for this abuse scandal. But yet, the Catholic Church and the Vatican want to build you, the taxpayers, the people who go to church. I don't feel that's right. I really don't. This is their screw up. They broke the law. They should be held responsible for it. Not the parishioners who go to church who had nothing to do with this. It goes on to say, although there was some belt tightening, the Archdiocese operates on a balanced budget and will continue to do so. The Archdiocesan Synod in 2014 has set forth a vision for the pastoral priorities of the Church in the Archdiocese, and the Archdiocesan staff will work with parishes and schools to fulfill that vision. Why is the Archdiocese still in debt? The Archdiocese will emerge from Chapter 11 with a loan of approximately $4.5 million on the Cousins Center and an additional loan of $3 million from the Cemetery Trust, which will go to abuse survivors. It was decided that having some debt would be the best way to bring the Chapter 11 to close, allowing the Archdiocese to pay the agreed upon settlements and move forward with its focus on spiritual education and charitable missions of the Church. Well, based on that baloney, you can kind of see why I steered away from the Catholic Church when I took my holy orders. There's so much lies and corruption going on within the Catholic Church. And as I said, there's plenty of good Catholic priests out there, good monsignors, good clergy people. But there's also a lot of bad Catholic priests too. Bad Catholic archbishops, bad Catholic bishops, and people like the Pope, who recently made statements that bishops have no obligation to report abuse. That's not something I would want to follow as a servant of God, or even as a parishioner. Because God would not teach something like that. That's the Catholic Church that makes up those rules, not God. And in this video, yes, it does sound like I'm bashing the Catholic Church, but within good reason, because I'm sticking up for the rights of the abuse survivors. That's the right thing to do. Next question. How will the debt be paid off? The Archdiocese budget will absorb the debt payments and pay off this debt over time, just as families have to make a mortgage payment or car payment. The Archdiocese will make these debt payments in part of its annual operating budget. Of course they will, from the money that you donate in the collection basket. Will this create hardships for the Archdiocese? Certainly it would be easier to be debt-free, which right then again, there they go, with it tells you that they wanted this stuff all dismissed. In fact, this is the first time in the history of the Archdiocese that the Archdiocese has faced an ongoing debt. Well, good. They screwed up. They covered this stuff up for years. Now it's time to pay the piper. However, we are called to be good stewards of the gifts entrusted to us, and we will continue to practice the sound stewardship in every aspect of our operations. Support of St. Francis de Sales Seminary, Catholic charities, parishes, schools, institutions will all continue to the best of our ability. 3 more questions left. What about parishes? Parishes were not part of the Chapter 11 proceeding. However, parishes voluntarily agreed to contribute their rights under old insurance policies and fund the therapy fund for abuse survivors. In addition, all parishes and schools received a legal release protecting them from future lawsuits relating to the claims that were filed or could have been filed in the bankruptcy. Need I say more on why I really don't trust the Catholic Church anymore? This is important because we wanted to certainty that we all could move forward together in our ministry of the Word, worship, and service. I could say something right now, but it's not appropriate. It's not priestly. Next question. Is this over? The legal proceeding is over. However, our commitment to the abuse survivors is not over. Outreach and support of those who have been harmed is now a permanent ministry of the Church. Our vigilance and commitment to victim assistance, safe environment programs, criminal background checks for employees and volunteers, training and education will never stop. Well, what about background checks of people who are going to be priests and deacons and people of that nature. But this is also an exciting time for the Catholic Church in the southeastern Wisconsin, and it is time to look forward with trust in the Lord. Well, I can't speak for God because I'm not God, but they say God forgives. I believe God forgives if you're truly sorry. But I have a feeling that a lot of these priests are going to burn in hell for what they did. I believe God will forgive them, but that doesn't mean they'll escape His punishment. I believe that a lot of these archbishops and bishops who covered this stuff up for years, remember, Archbishop Weakland was one of them. I have a feeling that they're going to have to suffer God's judgment on their day of judgment. Last question. How is the Catholic Stewardship Appeal affected by the settlement? The donations to the Catholic Stewardship Appeal were always used solely for the restricted purpose of each annual appeal: serving families, strengthening parishes, supporting schools, and forming priests and parish leaders. The settlement does not affect the Catholic Stewardship Appeal. As we turn the page and focus on the future, now is time for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee to renew the vibrancy of the Catholic Church in southeastern Wisconsin by revitalizing the spiritual, charitable, and educational mission of the Church. Donors to the Catholic Church Stewardship Appeal can be confident their gift will be used solely for that purpose. For more information, visit www.archmil.org/reorg, which is REORG, /plan.htm. And then the last line here says, Plan of Reorganization of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee and its Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceeding. Questions and answers, February 2016. Well, I know it's not very priestly of me, and I'm not passing judgment, but my opinion as a law enforcement professional and as a priest, I think a lot of that's a bunch of baloney. I think the Catholic Church is doing what they always did, and they're trying to cover their butts. You can interpret that any way you want, but bottom line is, these Catholic priests who did this stuff should be in prison. They should be deflocked. They should be kicked out of this stuff. It's just like this article I read about this bishop from, I believe he was from New York, and he was involved in covering this stuff up. And Pope Francis let him resign under a canon law, which is usually only supported for clergy that is sickly, that is retiring. So basically, Pope Francis allowed this guy to resign, this clergy member to resign, without any repercussions or anything. And if you look at the Catholic Church is in a lot of trouble. So many people are getting away from the Catholic Church because of this type of thing, because of the message that they teach. All these years, the Catholic Church always said, oh, if you have an abortion, God will never forgive you. Well, you know what? I believe that's a crock. I believe, like the Bible says, God will forgive you as long as you are truly sorry for your sins. And if you look at the Catholic Church and you look at Pope Francis, in the last 6 months, Pope Francis has been making many changes in the church. Now he's saying, oh yeah, God will forgive you if you had an abortion, as long as you're truly sorry, and you go to church and you confess it to the priest. Well, you know what? Anybody with common sense, we all know that anyways. We know God will forgive you as long as you're truly sorry. Okay? But for the Catholic Church to finally just say this now, you see, what it is, the Catholic Church is worried because they're losing so many people. They're losing millions of dollars. All that money you stick in a collection basket, people who aren't there, who aren't donating, they're losing that money. So now they're trying their best to get back the people and win the people over. You know, it's kind of like back when Jesus Christ was around, and you had the two major religions, or the three major religions. You had your Jewish, you had your Christianity, and you had your Roman. Okay? Now we all know, throughout the course of time in history, the Romans are what eventually evolved into the Roman Catholic Church. And back then, and I make this a point, back then, when Jesus Christ was crucified, the Romans and the Roman Catholic Church, even back when I was a kid, they always blamed it on the Jewish people and said, oh, it was the Jewish people's fault that they condemned Jesus Christ and he was crucified. Well, you know what? It wasn't all Jewish people back then. Some of it, and a lot of it, was the Jewish high priests who were pressured by Rome. Because Rome said, hey, everybody's turning to Jesus Christ. We're losing people. How can we get back these people? So they basically went to the Jewish people and they said, hey, if you get the Jewish people to turn on Jesus Christ, we'll give you some more leniency and freedom, and you'll be able to run your religion the way you want. And so some of the high priests in the Jewish religion actually got some of the Jewish people to condemn Jesus Christ, and they crucified him. They let Barabbas go, and they crucified him. Even the two sinners who were up there on the crosses with Jesus, they said right out, basically, why is Jesus being crucified when he didn't do nothing wrong? You know? And what you have to remember is, it wasn't the Jewish people that crucified Jesus Christ. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate and the Romans. The Romans crucified him, which the Romans eventually evolved into the Roman Catholic Church. So therefore, it is safe to say that the Roman Catholic Church is actually responsible for crucifying Jesus Christ. And today, as you can see, they still make their own rules. Look at this stuff. Look what I just read you. They make their own rules. They're constantly changing stuff in the Catholic Church, you know. And who gave them the permission to do that? It's not like God called them up on the phone and said, hey, I want you to change this. I want you to take this out. And I want you to put this in. You know, same thing back when I was a kid and I used to go to the Catholic Church. And, you know, priests would always say, you know, the Lord be with you. And the response is, and also with you. Well, now they changed that to, the priest says, the Lord be with you. And the parishioners say, and also with your spirit. Well, who gave them the right to change that? God didn't call them up and say, hey, I want you to say this instead. You know. And when I went to Catholic Church, when I was a kid, they used to, when they'd say the Our Father, they actually said it. You know. They actually said it. Nowadays, you go there, to a lot of Catholic churches, they sing it. They sing the Our Father prayer, the Lord's Prayer. Well, who told them to change that either? I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm just saying, who gave them permission to change that? You know? Bottom line is, what I'm getting at is, the Catholic Church makes their own rules. They don't follow God's rules a lot of the time. They make their own rules. And I'm sorry that if it sounds like I've bashed the Catholic Church, because yes, in a way I have. But in a way, yes, I have bashed the Catholic Church. But you know what? People need to know the truth. Simple as that. You need to stop believing a lot of the lies that the Catholic Church tells you. This came right from the Catholic Stewardship Appeal from Archbishop Jerome Lesticky's office. You heard the questions, you heard the answers. Basically, you, the taxpayers, the people who attend church, you're paying for these priests who committed these horrible crimes. I don't feel that's right. Why should you have to pay for their crimes and their mistakes? They should be paying for them. And as I've said, the Vatican has so much money, they have so many artifacts, they could afford to pay this themselves. And they don't. Just like the politicians, they bill it to the taxpayers.